I'm actually Scottish, and I remember my father telling me when I grew up, a Scot will do anything for his country except live there. And 20 years ago, I hopped on a plane to escape from my new in-laws with my wife and came to Hong Kong for 2 years, and here I am, 21 years later, standing here. I have a slightly different perspective, having been here for 21 years. I've actually managed to grow as Hong Kong has grown. And I thought it'd be useful to share my perspective as I've seen Hong Kong develop as a true global hub, and also share some thoughts about where I think Hong Kong is going, which I hope the audience will find interesting. Just as a bit of background on KPMG, you kindly mentioned our size. We have 144,000 people worldwide. Our revenues are 21 billion US, of which about 25% are in Asia Pacific. When I came out to Hong Kong in 91, there were 700 people in the office, including 16 partners. Now we run Hong Kong and China as one. We have 14 offices, 9,000 people, and 400 partners. The last time I walked into our partner room, I thought I'd gone to the wrong meeting because I didn't recognize some of the people there. We have so many partners now. Let me share some reflections. I think the first one I want to share is we made a big statement a year ago when we asked our global chairman, Michael Andrew, who unfortunately can't be here today because he's traveling, which is a common feature of the role of a global chairman. We asked Michael to base himself in Hong Kong. Michael was originally from Australia, so any move north of Australia would be more convenient for him anyway. But we wanted to make a statement that KPMG, one of the big four, believes the region is so important that its global chairman should be based in Asia. And Michael believes this very passionately. So Michael moved to Hong Kong a year ago with probably a 20-strong team of the global infrastructure group with him. So our global head of people and HR is with him, and several other global leaders. And we were talking earlier with John and John Pascal. It's got to be more than a statement. It has to be in substance. And it has been a challenge to pull through, to demonstrate to the rest of the organization that the global headquarters is in Hong Kong. But I think we've made a lot of progress. Let me run through some of the advantages we feel there are of that position. The first one is really this visible statement to the marketplace that compared to our competitors, we have our global leadership in Asia. Asia is the fastest growing part of the world, and we believe it's important for our global chairman to be nearest the fastest growing regions. So from our perspective, having Michael on the doorstep of China and not far from India, and then not too far away from Indonesia and some of the other fast-growing countries, is really the right thing to do. We found it very, very helpful in terms of government relationships and supporting our multinational clients, having our global team here. Secondly, the connectivity. We found in Hong Kong the connectivity is absolutely fantastic. Michael is in the Four Seasons, and within 35 minutes he can be at the airport on his way. So very, very good connectivity. But there's something which developed which surprised us. We found we've had more access to global leaders by having Michael based in Hong Kong and having some of us in Hong Kong than if we were in New York or London. The logic being that many global leaders, multinational CEOs, chairmen are passing through Asia or coming out to Asia much more often and actually are much easier to track down and have quality time with when they're actually in Asia. And this, as I said, has been a surprising byproduct of Michael being here. Two other points I'd just like to raise. The first one is a serious point, and the second one is relatively humorous. We believe we've got to demonstrate to our people at KPMG we are a United Nations type organization, not a NATO type organization. And there's been a tendency for the North Atlantic to dominate. And the Asian voice within KPMG and within the marketplace needs to be stronger. And that was another very important part. And you'll notice there's organizations like the Foum Institute and other organizations now who are trying to give the Asian perspective into what's happening globally. So a voice for Asia. And the second one, which is slightly flippant, is one cannot escape the conclusion that Hong Kong has a very benign tax structure, and being based in Hong Kong has a lot of advantages for any senior executive being based here. But the growth we've experienced in Hong Kong and Asia, in many ways, the drivers can be tracked back to the Hong Kong story. I'd just like to share with you 5 big drivers before talking about the future. The first driver, Hong Kong is an international trading and transport hub. Before the China story even started, that was the bedrock of Hong Kong. And that still is very, very strong. The second was Hong Kong as an entry point into China. 91, 92, China still hadn't really opened up. There have been waves of China opening up. But at one stage, 95% of all trade and all investment into and out of China was flowing through Hong Kong. And we've seen this development of China, as I said, in waves from a low-cost exporter into Sino-foreign joint ventures, which John mentions, into direct foreign investment, then into a domestic retail market in its own right, and now into its own capital market. And what we've been able to do is, in Hong Kong, grow in many ways on the back of that rise of China. And Hong Kong has been the nexus point of all those different waves I mentioned. The third one is Hong Kong as a capital market. And in the last 20 years, you've seen Hong Kong do a journey from a pretty ordinary local stock exchange into the stock exchange which was used with the privatizations of the state-owned enterprises in China, the so-called mega IPOs. You're talking about the China Telecoms, the China Mobiles, the China Construction Banks, the Shanghai Petrochemicals. Then the development of the stock exchange in Hong Kong for the privately owned enterprises. That is the first generation of the Chinese private wealth looking to either import capital from Hong Kong or get access to Western markets. And then finally, Hong Kong as a capital market to attract international offerings in its own right. A good example being Samsonite last year. So there's been this massive development of Hong Kong as a capital market, which has helped fuel our growth. And there's 2 other angles which tend to be forgotten. John mentioned them in passing. The first is infrastructure. Hong Kong is a fantastic success story on the use of infrastructure to galvanize development and the multiplier effect. When you look at the airport core projects which started back in the early 90s, and you look at the talk about the bridge and all the other developments going on now, the multiplier effect of this infrastructure has had a huge effect on the business community and on Hong Kong's competitiveness. And the last point on that is the consumer, John mentioned. When you look at the sheer scale of consumer spending, retail spending, which now is largely global brands servicing mainland Chinese visiting tourists, it's at the forefront of this big driver in the world economy of the Asian middle class. So those are the 5 themes we've seen over the years, and I think that's just going to carry on. But I'd just like to share with you, that is underpinned by some very, very key points. Hong Kong is built on a flexible labor market. Our clients have grown, and we have grown on a flexible labor market, the ability to hire and fire very, very quickly. The supply of talent, Hong Kong has been built on that. The limited and very, very clearly defined role of government in the past has been absolutely paramount. No deficits, simple tax system, and a light regulatory touch. These have absolutely been paramount to Hong Kong's growth. And underpinning us all has been the rule of law. So what does this all mean moving forward? We're still very confident that Hong Kong as a center in Asia and a global center on which we can use as a launch pad for our growth is very secure. But there will be changes. At the moment, we think the growth is being held back by the global uncertainty, particularly in Europe. But what will you see will happen? I just want to share it with you because I think this will put Hong Kong in a very strong position. The level of integration with southern China at the moment has got a long way to go. You've got the new bridge coming through, and there's a lot of procedural challenges which need to be overcome. But integration with southern China when that comes, will be a massive injection of opportunity here. Hong Kong as an international finance center will need to develop even more. The diversification of sources of capital beyond just China, the diversification of products, the development of a debt market, the development of true renminbi products. All of this will have to come, and I'm sure it will come, to keep Hong Kong at the center of the finance world. Hong Kong as a wealth management center for China is, again, relatively untapped at the moment. Hong Kong as the offshore capital center for China is probably achieved already, but the provision of wealth management and all of those services probably has quite a fair way to go, and there's real room for growth there. Hong Kong as a maritime and logistics center, compared to our friends in Singapore, the value-added services and the finance services relating to shipping and to maritime in general are probably further down the line than Hong Kong. But Hong Kong will definitely get there. And then there's been a lot of play about how Hong Kong can diversify. The Hong Kong government has 6 pillars. It talks about testing and certification, education, medical, environmental, innovation and technology, and cultural and creative industries. There has to be traction on these in order for Hong Kong to diversify. I think it will come, but it's taking quite a bit of time. Another area which is being developed, and we're hopeful of, is how to package the intellectual capital in Hong Kong to be a hub for the region. And there's 2 areas I'd just like to leave you with. One is Hong Kong as an intellectual property hub, taking advantage of all the legal intellectual capital here. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of the intellectual capital needs to be developed here, but if it can be owned, protected by law here, and then managed and controlled here, there's real potential. And linked to that is there's a lot of push at the moment on Hong Kong being an arbitration center. So when you hear all these things, it's an extension of the traditional Hong Kong story, but there's definitely going to be a need for Hong Kong to innovate. And I'd just like to leave with the 3 key challenges in order to do this. When you look at Hong Kong, it's got everything going for it, but these 3 questions need to be answered. And I'm sure Hong Kong will be able to answer them, and then we'll still be successful. But how to handle the tide of regulation. How to handle the tide of regulation and the pressure on labor market issues so that Hong Kong doesn't lose the flexibility and the ease of doing business. It's one of the biggest business issues we all face, and we've been discussing this with the government. There's support for that, but it's going to be a challenge. The second one, I think all 3 of us would understand about the cost of doing business in Hong Kong is not cheap. The cost of doing business in Singapore and other places in the region is also not cheap, but it's something we need to face up to. And the third one, which is a political point, is how to have the ability and the speed to make the necessary legislative changes that Hong Kong needs. So those 3 challenges I leave with you, but on behalf of KPMG, I'd say we have no doubts whatsoever that Hong Kong is the right place from which to launch our regional and global strategies. Thank you.